much for coming to my presentation, and thank you very much for having me. And I'm going to talk about, yes, best practices for sponsorship ROI. I'm going to make a couple of points to start out. First of all, I think I'm the only sports presentation on the entire agenda for the 3 days. And I know I'm the only sponsorship item on the agenda for the 3 days. So I'm going to tell you folks that, yes, this is about the NCAA Men's Division I basketball tournament, but this sponsorship idea, it applies to all genres. I mean, let's look at where the business is going. Jack Myers talked yesterday about how most of its selling is going to be electronic or programmatic. It's that last 20% where salesmanship is going to have to come into effect, and that's selling things like these sponsorships associated with our programs. So I have a little video here, and I don't know if it's going to work because they never work, but it's about 2.5 minutes. I'm going to start in the middle of it, I think. It sounds great, doesn't it? All right. So if that's the case, then I'm going to just skip it. It's not important. Okay, so let's talk about, we have with the NCAA tournament what we call the CCP program. And we do this in conjunction, by the way, with CBS. It's a joint venture. You may have heard of it. It's on in March, hence the term March Madness, and it involves 67 games in a single elimination tournament of college basketball players. And our corporate champions, we have 3 of them. This is in 2018. It changes slightly every year. And then we have corporate partners. And this ability to sponsor the tournament enables them to be what you might call like the official auto of the NCAA tournament, the official marketing partnerships. And it enables them to use our marks, our logos, our talents, our celebrities, the NCAA and their storylines and their imagery. It's a tremendous advantage, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. So this is what I like to call the halo effect. People love the NCAA tournament. We have our CCP brands that associate themselves with the NCAA tournament, and then that rubs off and people love the brands themselves. So let's talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of ROI advertising out there, along with Tom's, who we've used in the past, that takes exposure to the media advertising and points that into an increase in sales. What this research does is not based on just the advertising, it's based on the awareness of the sponsorship and how that adds to ROI. And that's significant because that's truly cross-platform. There's people who use their sponsorship not just in the creative in their ads, but also in their packaging, in their signage, in their participation in our live events, and on digital and mobile as well. And then there's social. So it's truly by nature cross-platform. Is that sponsorship resonating so that they in turn are aware of the sponsorship, the fans of that particular event? So this is what I call my sponsorship ROI halo effect model. And it's simple. So what you see first are the 3 things that advertisers and official sponsors have control over. One of them is their media spend, but that can be anybody. You don't have to be an official partner in order to spend advertising in our event. The second is customizing their creative. That you do have to be an official sponsor in order to use our, like I said, imagery, logos, tags, marks. And then thirdly, how do you activate and how do you use our signature assets in order to further that sponsorship association? And that, once again, you need to be an official marketing partner in order to do that. If you do that correctly, that's going to add to more sponsorship awareness. In other words, awareness of the association between the brand and the sponsorship. And then in turn, what I call the halo effect, which should in turn add to more brand share, more sales, etc. So I'm contending to you, I don't think everybody's here associated with sports. I'm contending to you that this works for any genre, but I'm going to focus on the NCAA tournament. And we used a vendor, Revolution Marketing. This is a company that's been around 18 years. This company specializes in sports marketing, and they have a research department, and that research department has developed this model for measuring sponsorship ROI, in which they've stat tested it a couple of years ago with a major advertiser and indicated that it's statistically viable and that it works. So that was the idea of our study, and we've been doing this now. We're about to embark on our third year of using this vendor. That's the idea, to try to understand what are the best practices and the best way to activate in order to build sponsorship ROI. Now I can go through the methodology and it's boring, and I'll tell you right now, I haven't seen one presentation today where they talked about methodology. I mean, the guy today from Wharton was spouting statistics. He could have just been using a dartboard as far as I was concerned. So I'm not going to bore you with that. It is survey-based. It's actually multiple surveys in which he puts that together along with industry published knowledge in order to come up with this. So we can offline get into more detail, but for right now, I'm going to talk about some of what we found out, what the results were. So first of all, they want to measure the interest in March Madness among, how big is the fan base? And I'll tell you right now that they've measured a lot of different events, and that's our benchmark. All the events that Revolution has measured, they've told us that 41% of the population is interested in March Madness on a 5-box scale, the top 2 boxes, and that's among the highest of all the events they measured. I think the only sport that beats us is NFL. So we have to take a knee to that sport. But that was a joke, you see. It was contextual relevancy. That's what my presentation is all about. But this is showing all of the categories that we measured of the brands, and it's showing that there isn't a wide range. Basically, the percentage of those categories that are March Madness fans are somewhere between 37% all the way up to 76%, but the median is around where that 41% is. That's going to tie in later to the ROI calculation. We asked the question, how do you follow March Madness? Not surprisingly, 70% say it's on television, but we also see that there's a lot of out-of-home viewing. There's a lot of streaming on our MML app, and there's other ways that people consume. And we do a lot of research on that. This is just one question on this survey. So overall, we averaged 6% unaided awareness on the survey. And so that may not sound high, but if you're just asking people with no context, you know, can you name any official partners of the NCAA tournament, 6% is the magic number. In a pre-wave a couple of months before, it was 2%. For our competitors, it's somewhere around the same. So that's kind of like a standard, although we have some that are much higher and some that are lower. And I'm going to talk about why some of those are lower. So these are some of the items that add to sponsorship ROI brand awareness. That's sponsorship awareness. And one of them is, of course, the level of investment. So we have advertisers that spend $20+ million, and then official partners that spend considerably less than that. The amount you spend, of course, is going to make a difference. That's always a factor, but it's not the only factor. Another one is, how do you leverage the signature assets that are available to you as a corporate partner? So I'm going to tell you right now, we don't own the Staples Center. That's a signature asset we don't have. We can't call this the Home Depot College Championship football game. You know, we can't call it the Home Depot March Madness tournament. But we do have other signature assets that are in program that are very valuable. The AT&T at the halftime show, Hardwood Heroes, sponsored by Infinity. So these signature assets that help associate our tournament with the different corporate sponsors that are participating. Next is the tenure. We have, somebody signs up as a corporate partner on March 1st. And then the tournament starts 2 weeks later. That's not enough time. It takes on average about 3 years. There's a best practice, okay? It takes about 3 years to build up that equity so that it starts to contribute to the sponsorship awareness. I've seen exceptions, but that's a general rule of thumb. The quality of the activations, once again, we have a whole team. This is what they specialize in having the best quality activation for our partners, but it can be something as simple as sticking the NCAA Blue Disc logo on their package if it's a CPG advertiser. So the activation quality can range. And then last of all, I mentioned ratings, but ratings is on here because it's actually not a big factor in generating sponsorship awareness. And that's interesting. It's an NCAA tournament. We have a great year, we have a lesser year, but it's still a huge audience, and so it's not a big factor. So let's talk about some of the key performance indicators. First of all, this looks very similar to Mike Bloxham and Teresa Pepe's emotional DNA that they showed in the previous presentation. But what we're contending here is the blue is what people say about March Madness. The gray is the average of our 18+ advertisers who are corporate partners. And you see some of these attributes line up, some of them don't. But what we see is that, for instance, for youthfulness, fun, exciting every year, where the tournament really spikes, that over time we can transfer that onto our advertisers and they increase in that area as well. Here we're talking about how people feel about the sponsorship of the tournament, and very high scores. Asking basically $5, top 2 out of $5 questions as to how they feel about the idea that people are corporate partners in the NCAA tournament. And where we really see spikes, by the way, is when we ask people, how do you feel about the fact that we enable hundreds of kids to go to college on athletic scholarships that otherwise they would not have been able to do? And those are always very high scores wherever we measure that. What we're looking at here is we ask about brand opinion. And the brand opinion for March Madness is always very high, higher than their average. So the Revolution norm is 44%. Our average is 71%. Even our lowest scorer on this is higher than the Revolution norm. So that's what I'm talking about, the halo effect, making people feel better about these brands because of their association with the tournament. And then the next one is on purchase intent. So this is going to tie into ROI later. And once again, very high scores compared to the norm, and that is even the one that ranks the lowest in this case. So purchase intent goes up as a result of the sponsorship. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more now, but some of the factors in building market share with your participation in the tournament, one of them is, are you a category leader? So if you are overwhelmingly a category leader, it's a little harder to lift the needle than if you have a lower baseline, so to speak. The type of product, generally, it's easier to lift with CPGs or QSRs than maybe a Another type of product that's more upscale, although we do very well with insurance, with luxury auto, and affluent type categories. So we're bucking the trend there. Time, I already talked about the 3-year rule. And then the level of sponsorship awareness, which is based on the factors that I talked to you earlier. So here's a brand share. We averaged about a 7-point lift in brand share. So when I say a lift in brand share, let me explain. We look at the category of people who were aware of the sponsorship, and we take a sample of those people who are aware of the sponsorship. We match that up with a control group of people who are not aware of the sponsorship but are NCAA fans, and then we look at the lift. And so that's what I mean when I say sponsorship awareness is what's driving the brand lift. And we invariably see these kind of lifts. We're, like I said, averaging 7 points, and it averages widely depending on the factors that I mentioned in the previous slides. So how much time do I have left? 2 hours? No. 15 minutes. Wow, I can talk slower. That's impossible for me. All right, so let's talk a little bit about then the ROI calculation. Because all of these different elements that we've talked about already factor into the calculation for ROI. So first of all, the market size. Well, we talked about that in one of the earlier slides, that we average about 41%, which is akin to the population. Some it's higher, some it's lower. So that's the universe of people who are consumers of that particular category who are March Madness fans. Second of all, the reach of the sponsorship, that's the unaided recall multiplied by the proportion of the market who are fans. So I showed you that the proportion of markets who are fans are here. So let's say that's 40%. Unaided recall, let's say that's 5%. You multiply 40 times 0.05, and that's where you're getting your reach. So then they're going to look at the incremental brand share. I already discussed that. That's the lift you're getting in brand purchasing by the folks who are aware of the sponsorship versus those that aren't. So you see, I hope, where we're going with this. We're saying this is the lift in sales that can be attributed to the awareness of the sponsorship. And then lastly, the profit that's generated by the aware fans, and that's done through multiplication. So I'm going to jump to that slide here. But before I do, let me just say that according to Revolution, our average was $3.3 in sales lift compared to $1 spent in marketing rights. That is, according to Revolution, the highest of any event that they've ever measured. Their average is more like $3 for every dollar. So we think we're doing something right. I don't know what it is, but maybe after you've seen this presentation, you can tell me. No. Okay. Howard, laugh louder, please. So let's talk here about the calculation, and this is an actual example that I've blinded. So through Revolution, through publicly available statistics, said that in this particular category, there's about, that's $26.8 or so billion in sales in the category over a 3-month period. The reach is 2.3%. For this particular advertiser, that's 39% of fans within the universe of these purchasers times the 6% awareness. So that's a 2.3% reach based on those figures. So if you take those two and you multiply it, that comes to $628 million that are attributed to increased sales by people who are aware of the sponsorship. And then once we go down the list here, that's about 44% based on the 7% sales lift. So let me explain that a little bit more. We're saying here that March Madness fans made up 628 million in sales, and then 7% of that is attributed to folks being aware, fans being aware of the sponsorship. Comes to $44 million, which is down here. The estimated profit margin, again, this is based on public sources. The estimated profit margin for this particular product category is 22.4%. If you multiply 22.4% by the 44 million that can be attributed due to awareness of the sponsorship, that comes to a $9.9 million sales lift. And if you compare that to $1.4 million that they paid in marketing rights, that's a $7.1 in increased sales for every dollar that they spent in marketing rights. So I think, I feel real strongly that there isn't another vendor. I'm not here to push revolution, but I don't think there's another technique or vendor who's figuring this out the way these folks figured it out. And I will contend once again that this works here for March Madness. I think that we're a really good candidate for this methodology. But I know it works with any sport where they're selling sponsorships. And again, they're selling sponsorships in all sorts of shows now. I mean, we're doing it at Turner for Conan. I'm sure they're doing it at wherever it is you work. So I'm going to wrap it up with my takeaways, and then I have an hour and a half for questions. But briefly, March Madness is a great vehicle for reaching the target audience for corporate partners. We established that early on in the presentation. Using customized theme creative in order to build that awareness is key. And now you may say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. We have sponsors who don't do that for whatever reason. Yeah, it's a little more expensive to actually customize your creative, especially for a tournament that only lasts 3 weeks. But what we tell them is, if you want to maximize your investment in the event, this is the way to do it. So a lot of over time, our advertisers, they get it, and they're doing that. Then to build awareness, carve out a signature asset. I mentioned that before. There's a whole range of what that means and what can be done. And that's part of the creative process. But if that signature asset, I mentioned, it's an obvious one, but AT&T at the half, sponsoring the halftime show, that generates a lot of awareness for AT&T. And not just because they just bought me. It's because that generally works. And then sponsor-friendly. College basketball fans are very enthusiastic. We have lots of data on that. People filling out brackets, people engaging cross-platform, people who, for 3 weeks out of their life, this is like an important event. And it's amazing how they participate. And that excitement, as I hope we've talked about, translates into how they feel about the brands that participate. And then I already mentioned the ROI. And for our advertisers, on average, it generates a lot of increased ROI based on their marketing rights. So that's what I've got. I really hope I've conveyed to you how special this kind of research is, why it's important, and why it can be important to you as well as it is to us at Turner Sports and CBS. Are there any questions? Wait, how do you know it's nobody else? They haven't raised their hands yet. Okay, fair enough.
Have you looked at the regular season, where CBS broadcasts some games during regular season, and the tournament championships versus the lift of the NCAA tournament? You kind of look at how it grows and how relatively more effective tournament is to the conference tournaments for regular season?
Let me think about that. No. We haven't done that, but you have to understand where I'm situated. I work for Turner, and I'm basically serving as CBS's senior vice president of insights for 3 months out of the year. So I kind of feel as if, all right, we are selling those rights. For our rights encompass, frankly, 88 different championships. It's not just the NCAA tournament, but because that's where, I can't tell you the exact amount, but hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising are sold during that period, and a very large amount in marketing rights. That's why we focus on that. And before I come back to you, are there any other questions? Yes, Mike Capretta.
So you mentioned to maximize the results, it takes 3 years for a spot. Is that what you said? Can you explain that part a little bit more?
Yeah.
And what is typically the reaction of perhaps a new corporate sponsor that hears that? And what are some of the typical lifts you see in year one for a sponsor?
Well, number one, it's a very convenient excuse for bad performance. But thank you for pointing it out. No, when I say 3 years, I mean generally it takes a 3-year association with the event in order to build sponsorship awareness. To a certain extent, that's common sense, right? I mentioned one advertiser who they announced their sponsorship on March 1st. The tournament started 2 weeks later. And they showed an increase in sponsorship ROI, but in order to maximize it, they need a little bit more time to build it. And we sell usually our events under 3-year contracts, and I think that makes sense. It's not fair to say to an advertiser, come in for one, and we've had them, but come in for 1 year and expect an immediate lift in sponsorship awareness. It's happened, but it's difficult. And did I cover the whole question? Okay. Clay, do you have another question? I got your name wrong, I'm sorry. Steve.
And I can be Clay if you want.
All right.
If you look at as fantasy sports have grown exponentially, you mentioned bracket challenges briefly. Have you looked broadly at how fantasy sports, or different fantasy competitions, if they get tied into the tournament, how they have impacted the value of sponsorship?
Well, we have, for instance, the Capital One Bracket Challenge game. So there's an activation, right? That's an example of one of our corporate champions who's activating on the bracket game. And so when we do their study, we have stats. As you know, we ask that question: how much are you aware of their association with this particular activation? And it's high. It does very well.
So, the reason I ask is there are many bracket challenges.
Tell me about it, yes.
So, I mean, how do you sell that sponsorship at it? There's value there, but ESPN does one, and Yahoo Sports does one, and a lot of other ones do one as well. So have you looked across the spectrum of them to sell, how you sell the value of yours versus the others?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you, maybe too honest. We do surveys every year before the tournament's coming out. We're saying, which of these networks are you going to watch the tournament on? And the number one network is always ESPN. It hasn't been on ESPN in 35, 40 years, right? I don't know if it ever was. So to some people, that's their default answer. And it's the same thing with the bracket. They may not even be using the ESPN bracket, but that is often their number one answer. So I feel like it taints the answer to that question because they have that brand advantage when it comes to more granular items like, for instance, a bracket challenge game. I do know that Capital One has been sponsoring it for a couple of years, and they're happy with that activation. Is there anybody else? Mike?
All the mics are asking questions.
Yes.
Give the detailed methodology. Do you offer advertiser category exclusivity for this? And do you see any difference around the types of vertical performance or advertising?
So when it comes to official marketing partners, there's exclusivity. To give you a quick example, our official rent-a-car was Enterprise. And Enterprise told us, well, we want our focus of our advertising campaign in 2019 to be the selling of our used cars. We had to say no. That car category is taken up already by Buick and Infiniti. So as far as sponsorship goes, yes, it's exclusive. As far as media participation goes, I mean, anybody can buy a spot. That's not exclusive. So we have a lot of car companies in there, and if Enterprise wants to just buy spots and dots, that's their prerogative. Anything else?
You looking at me for another one?
I'd love to have give me your best shot. Go ahead. You're all right? Okay. Steve, Howard, nothing?
Are you playing Cushers or grossing group?
The Brickman. No. Well, if there's nothing else, I really very much appreciate you coming down to see my presentation. And if you run into any of your colleagues, tell them how great it was if you liked it. If you didn't like it, my name is David Poltrak. No. Anyway, thank you.